Hello, everyone. Welcome, relatives. Thank you so much for bearing with our technical difficulties. This is just the world we live in, and I'm sure everyone is very familiar with rolling with the punches when it comes to these virtual things. So, really appreciate all the patience. And yeah, hello. My name is Jade Begay. I am a citizen of Tasuka Pueblo, and I'm also Denae. I'm the Climate Justice Director here at Indian Collective, and it is my honor today to welcome you all to this virtual space, this gathering, and this panel, Healing Our Nations. And I'm so excited to introduce all of the amazing panelists and speakers to you all in just a moment. Before we go into that, I just wanted to take a moment to kind of acknowledge the day and why we're here. So, February 14th is sort of a dual holiday for our people, for our communities, for our nations. On one hand, it's Valentine's Day to many in this world, and that's great. As a Libra, as a romantic person myself, I definitely can respect a holiday that celebrates love and affection and romance. But to us, to our people, our Indigenous and Native communities, it is also a day where we use the day to honor and grieve and commemorate our relatives, our missing and murdered Indigenous relatives. I really think it's possible for us to celebrate both, right? And to hold space for both holidays, or both commemorative days. And so that's because I think it's out of love for our people, love for our lands, love for our ways of life that we call on today being a national day of action and memorial for our missing and murdered Indigenous relatives. And it's also out of love that we do this work to protect our relatives and to end violence against both land and our people. So with that said, just to take that one step further, I think there's really no better way to show love to our family, our loved ones, our community, by helping them and ensuring that our people feel safe, our people feel protected, and they feel heard and seen. And so all of the speakers you'll hear from in just a bit are doing that work, that heart work, to really, like I said, protect and defend our people and our ways of life, and ultimately our land as well. Before we jump into intros, and before we get to learn more about the people on our panel, I wanted to share a little bit more background on how and why this day has been reclaimed as a national day of honoring missing and murdered Indigenous people. So, for about, more than a couple of decades, so around the time of 1992 is when this day, February 14th, was really reclaimed. Valentine's Day was really reclaimed as the official day for Native women and people to recognize and memorialize the missing and murdered Indigenous and Native people. This really was catalyzed from a really devastating moment that took place in Vancouver in so-called Canada, where one of our relatives was found murdered. And from that moment, people of that community and region gathered and marched to honor this life and grieve this life. And from there, this momentum to use this day to celebrate, or rather honor honor our relatives has taken place. So from there, from that time, we have continued to use this day to elevate this issue, to talk about it, to bring awareness, and to really, create a healing moment for our people, and to again just honor all of the lives and honor the work that is happening to protect our relatives. So yeah, with that background, I want to now pivot and turn it over to introduce the folks on our panel. How about let's start? We just mentioned, how this movement, how this moment, this day, kind of was born from a moment that took place in so-called Canada, and so I'd like to first let Kakeka ThunderSky introduce themselves.
Anim Buju, Kakeka ThunderSky, Dishnakaz, Nishnabe Quinn and Dow, Poplar River, Nadunji, Shegwa, Winnipeg, Gaye, Denae, Dem. Hello, my name is Kakeka ThunderSky. I am Anishinaabe from Poplar River, which is in northern Manitoba up in Treaty 5. But I've been living in Winnipeg. I'm a former kid in care here in the city, and I'm a member of the Thunderbird clan. I am a new mother. I just finished feeding my little baby here. I just put her down. And some of the work that I do here in Winnipeg is really around child advocacy and the child welfare system. I also do some work with the Red Rising magazine collective. And across so-called Canada, I've done solidarity work with Indigenous youth for Wet'suwet'en and the Tiny House Warriors.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Jordan, can we hear from you? Can you introduce yourself?
Hi, relatives. It's so good to be here in this virtual space with all of you. I wish it could be happening in person, but I guess this is just how it's going to go, and we're adapting as best we can, so thank you for hanging in there with us. My name is Jordan Marie Brainsley White Horses Daniel. I'm Kulichaka Dakota, a citizen of Kulichaka Oyate, the Loyalville Indian Reservation in Central South Dakota. I am the founder and organizer of Rising Hearts, just really dedicated to building community and really upholding intersectionality while still making place and a platform for Indigenous voices and faces to be front and center, so that the community around us knows and sees that Indigenous peoples are still here. And a lot of our initiatives focus on missing and murdered Indigenous relatives, advocacy, climate justice work, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and several other of our initiatives that we have running on Native lands, running with purpose, an Indigenous wellness movement, and really just building community and being there for each other. So I'm also a professional runner. I use my platform now to really intersect advocacy with running in pair and raising awareness about missing and murdered Indigenous relatives and helping to fundraise through those runs to support the hardworking organizations that have dedicated their lives to support the families and the advocates to end this injustice. And so that's just a little bit about me, and happy to share more a little bit later on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jordan. Ruth, can we call on you to introduce yourself?
Sure. Niro Shadzi Nakwaga O Madashi Miadesheds Ma Basigas Madzigads Nakwaga O. Hello, everybody. My name is Ruth Buffalo. It's an honor to share this space with you virtually on such a heavy day. But I believe that we are working towards justice to bring the change that we need. I'm a citizen of the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara Nation. I'm a member of the Awache clan, which is the Dripping Earth or Dripping Dirt clan. My mom is a child of the Knife clan, and I'm originally from Mandaree, which is located on the Fort Berthold Indian Reservation. I'm I reside in Fargo, and so I'm proud to represent the people of District 27 in the House of Representatives here in North Dakota. Halfway through my first 4-year term, and we meet every other year for our legislative session. So we are in session right now. We're on day 27 out of 80. A lot of my work has really focused on public health. I have extensive work in our communities and focusing on our youth, and so I think I'll be able to touch on some of this work later. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ruth. So glad you can be here. Denae.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hey everyone, my relatives. My name is Denae Shanidiin. I am born to the Denae Nation, otherwise known as the Navajo Nation. I'm Hanagahni, one who walks around clan. I'm also Korean on my father's side. Kitlanchini, the Red House people, is my maternal grandfather's clan, and Bilagana white people is my paternal grandfather's clan. I appreciate this discussion around today. My journey through missing and murdered advocacy started when I was a young girl, and I grew up with the story of my own auntie being murdered. I've seen the way that it has affected my family. I've seen the way that through the numerous and countless murders and missing relatives in my nation, among many other nations, has really transformed the way that we operate as people, the way that we can move forward in perpetuity, our wellness as people and as nations. And really that's where my advocacy work stems from, is from this personal experience of understanding what this trauma means. So I run an organization called MMI Who Is Missing, and I've tried to compile a lot of educational materials in how to understand this violence as a whole, to understanding the movement, and how we as tribal people and individuals and families can heal in this time of climate catastrophe and rampant white supremacy, and understanding how this violence still takes place today, and what it means for our people and the effects that it has on our people. So really it's a beautiful educational platform for the general public to kind of interpret that information and become more aware on these issues, as well as supporting local tribal organizations and organizations across so-called Canada and the States. So I really just try and support the leaders and the matriarchs, the people really doing the groundwork to end this kind of violence in our communities.
Thanks so much, Denae. And yeah, really excited to dive deeper into all of the work that each of you do. Candi, last but not least, can you share more about yourself and who you are? Oh, I think you're muted. All right. Just got a little tech audio thing to work out.
Okay.
And bear with us as we, work out the tech difficulties. Let's try again.
Okay. Am I better? I turned the power
And let's see. All right. So, yeah. Again, thanks everyone for working with us or being patient and as we figure this out. But yeah, and we'll come back to Candi to give.
Are you able to hear me better?
Oh. Okay. Okay. Thanks. Okay. Well, yeah. We'll come back to Candi once we're able to work that out. And I wanted to, as I mentioned, we wanted to go deeper into everyone's work and what they're doing right now to combat or address or make create more awareness around this epidemic. So yeah, just would love to hear more from each of you and hear you talk about your connection to this issue and the work that you're involved in to combat this epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous people. So Denae and Jordan, you talked briefly about the platforms that you both have created and work on. And I was hoping that, which are both so amazing, and I've used your resources and the different storytelling campaigns that you have all created to educate myself to become more aware of these issues myself. So I was hoping to hear from you both on sharing some context on numbers and statistics, kind of just giving us like an idea of the realities of this epidemic and what is why are we doing this work? So if yeah, either one of you, maybe Denae, if you want to start us off there. Oh, you're muted.
So as sorry about that. As we know, this is not fairy tale. It's a very real issue in our communities and it is happening every single day. It is a rampant violence that takes place everywhere, not just on tribal lands or in rural communities, but also especially in border towns and also taking place in urban communities. So this is everywhere and it's widespread. It happens in every state. Um, it happens all the way up to Canada and within our southern relatives. And we live with statistics and realities, such as the second leading cause of death for young girls ages 1 through 4 is murder. That's crazy. And 1 in 4 Indigenous men and boys have experienced sexual violence in their lifetime, and 1 in 4 Indigenous women will be survivors of rape. These realities really do affect every part of who we are as Indigenous people. And, for myself, we've all collectively been through so much this past year. And though it's been a really incredible year for grassroots alliances and solidarity, as well as advocacy and awareness, even in the past 3 years, we've seen missing and murdered show up more in the news, and even at the national level we have federal legislation going on. So many tribal states or tribal organizations are pushing towards task forces and how to address this violence. But it has also been a really devastating year for our communities in so many ways. We've seen spikes in violence and trafficking, as well as hate crimes and domestic violence. Racism within white supremacy under this global pandemic of COVID-19 has exacerbated all these violences. So while there are a lot of advocacy work and things taking place and steps taken place by the matriarchs in our communities, leading the way to end this violence. And we know the reality is that it has worsened and infrastructure has failed. In my line of work, I have been exposed to some tribal organizations and their concerns of with an already established reality of us not having enough resources and funding to protect our survivors and to provide wellness in our communities. Those things have crumbled underneath COVID-19, and we've seen domestic violence shelters lose their funding. And then within the home, the stress in the home, we know that 40% of women who are victims of homicide were killed by their intimate partner. So this has taken place inside these homes. And with COVID-19 being such a stressful and traumatic time for our communities, I can only imagine the kinds of repercussions that has on our mental and spiritual well-being. So there's not so much positivity that I can bring forward in this conversation. I just want us to be very real about how horrible and devastating this crisis is. And I think the motion for today is like this violence stems out through this colonial occupation that has caused so much environmental degradation on Indigenous land and body, and it's all connected. And I think that's what I try and do in my work, is trying to really communicate that language to those who are non-Indigenous to understand what this violence means, because the reality is, unfortunately, or part of it is, in my mind, is working with them for them to understand the harms that they're causing and that they perpetuate within our communities. But it really is also about healing. It's about us returning to ourselves as individuals and healing our bodies and these traumatic experiences, historical and recent, ongoing, and how to be resilient in those spaces and protect one another, starting with our own families and our own relatives, our children. We need to protect our children. Focusing on that generation is really important to me, because if we can establish a world where they don't have to grow up with a lot of these harms, I think that's what's going to sustain us as Indigenous people.
Thank you so much for just bringing that that honesty, that realness. We're in this moment of reckoning, and a lot of people are talking about truth, reconciliation, reparations, and I think in all the work that we do, we have to begin with that radical truth part, and that's where healing begins. We can't have healing without radical truth telling. So thank you. And Jordan, we'd love to hear from you. Denae had mentioned that there has been some visibility this past year, and thanks to all of you, thanks to all of the work that all of you are doing. But what still needs to happen when it comes to visibility on this issue, and what are you doing to make that happen?
Yeah, thank you. One thing that really stuck out to me as, on my own journey of learning about this epidemic is, back in college, I started learning about this. The Highway of Tears was mentioned, and I really want to give, acknowledgement to our First Nations relatives. This epidemic and this injustice extends beyond colonial borders. It extends all over the world where fossil fuel extraction is happening and colonization has touched. And our First Nations relatives really began this movement of missing and murdered Indigenous relatives. And I first learned about it in college. And then a couple years later, after college, I attended my first rally as I was starting to learn more about climate injustice and what we can be doing about stopping pipelines. And that's where I attended my first Reject and Protect TXL pipeline to stop this extraction project from happening over my homeland. And that's where I first started learning about man camps and the historical violence that is happening along those man camps and the high rates of domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, drug trafficking, and all of these, really heartbreaking realities that is a reality for our people. And it's just been a couple decades worth of just knowledge and listening, sitting in, even though I am Indigenous and I can be around these conversations, there's so much more to learn. And one thing that really put it in perspective was learning from Anita Lucchesi of the Sovereign Bodies Institute. And she said, our relatives go missing 3 times. They go missing in life, they go missing in the data, and they go missing in the media. And that's where I feel like I can do my part of trying to help be a voice and an advocate and a community organizer is helping with visibility. And the last few years, as I've just been learning and sitting in on webinars, signing up for as much as I can to just learn more about what is happening, who are the advocates, who are the families, what can we be doing, where can the money be going. I started organizing prayer vigils and started organizing community events to bring people together to start talking about this, especially outside of Indigenous conversations. And something that also has to be known is that intergenerational trauma exists in all of our families and it's being passed down. And this long-standing historical violence has been happening since colonization for over 500 years. And this is something that is in all of our families, whether it's impacting you directly or indirectly. We know someone who knows someone who's lost someone, or we have lost a loved one. I've lost a cousin, Brittany Tiger, and her family, her mom and sisters are still fighting for justice for her. And this is everyday reality for so many of us. And I wanted to use my platform as I've been growing it as a blogger, as a community organizer, to help create platforms and opportunities to talk about this, to share that this is not just, impacting Indigenous women and our girls, but it's happening to our elders, our little ones, our Two Spirits, our trans, everyone in our community. And that this is, has been primarily a silent crisis, but finally now it is getting visibility. And for me, it just got to a point where it felt like no one was putting this on the national news. No action was being done. It felt like Indigenous people were the only ones always talking about this of what can we be doing? What else are we missing? And that's where I kind of gave up and was just like, you know what? I know how to run. I've been a runner my whole life. I'm just going to use this time and space to give back to them. To honor them and remember them. And so that's when I decided running in prayer on the competitive platform in my life of trying to bring this conversation into a new platform, but also being intentional and purposeful in how I can give back to them, to remember them, to honor them and their families, and to pray for them, to their families, for justice for our next generations and for healing. And it's just created this really beautiful opportunity to still build and create community, to still have these conversations, and to get people to understand how heartbreaking and how true this is, and how they can show up as allies, as friends to our communities, and how they can be maybe taking some of the weight from some of the families and the advocates, because every single day it's being done by them. The law enforcement is not showing up enough. It's the families that are out there doing the search parties and doing the bulk of this work when they're not doing it quick enough. So it's just me using my platform to share what's going on, elevating other organizations, creating virtual runs to help fundraise for, like National Indigenous Women's Resource Center, to fundraise for Sovereign Bodies Institute, to continue supporting their work. And at the end of the day, they're supporting the families. And so that's what matters most to me. But it's all being part of a much bigger collective that I'm really grateful to be in, as I'm still learning how to be an advocate and a voice in this space, but just being there to support and elevate as much as I can.
Okay, Jordan, thank you for that, and thank you for really showing us, leadership in being able to use your own set of skills, being a runner, being an athlete, and how, with our own skill sets, with our own tools, with our, own passions, we can create intersections with these issues, and we can use, those skills that we each have. And I think that just really is inspiring to see that innovation, to see that, also devotion to an issue, to our people, using the thing that you love to amplify this issue. So Denae and Jordan, you brought up some really interesting points. You brought up how there's legislation in the works to build more infrastructure, to build more data, to address the lack of data that exists, to even create better systems to have accountability and have justice, like these task force. And I wanted to pivot to Candi and Ruth to speak to that and how these different or these various bills, these various forms of legislation are creating more justice in our communities for missing and murdered Indigenous people. So, Candi, you're back, and I hope all the audio stuff was figured out. But I'm wondering if you can speak to that and also intro yourself.
Hi, can you hear me well? Am I okay now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I'm Betty Washte relatives. Hematak yapi, leampe tukile, iyo ha chante, washte nape chuziapi. Imach yapi, chante makielawi. Imach yapi, wakia tuampi iyo yampawi. Me washichi chajekile, Candi brings plenty. Hello, everyone. I would like to greet you with a handshake from my heart. My name is Candi Brings Plenty, and I am an enrolled member of the Oglala Sioux tribe, coming to you from the Black Hills here in South Dakota, and I identify as a queer Indigenous, non-binary Two-Spirit. And I am so grateful that the intent to be inclusive is now reaching MMIR. To use that R, I know a lot of folks are questioning that, and now we have a state bill here in South Dakota. We've had one previously in 2019, and it definitely had MMIP, and that was to be missing and murdered Indigenous relatives, missing and murdered Indigenous people. And it is because, like we were talking about and hearing from Jordan, that this is an epidemic that doesn't just impact women and girls, it impacts Two-Spirit folks. And, just even within the identity itself too, we have trans women and trans men who identify as Two-Spirit or queer Indigenous, and we have men as well, and young boys. So this is more than just about our missing and murdered Indigenous women. However, it does begin with our matriarchs. It does begin with our women, because when our women are under attack, our entire communities and our tribal nations are as well. So I'm so grateful to see that this movement has become so inclusive, because that is part of all of our cultures, all of our Indigenous languages. And even in Lakota, we say matakiase, and that means we're all relatives, we are all related, and we are definitely all connected. And to continue this cultural protocol brings unity, and it brings our voices together, and it continues to awaken us within our Tioshpais and our Tiwahes, our families, our extended families, our chosen families, our Hunka relatives, so that we can be seen and heard. And especially now that we're elevating from just beyond our family cores, where, initially would go out on foot. And that is part of what it was like for us in our traditional societies with our akichitas going out into the communities. But now we have our legislator warriors. And I like using that term right now, because in everything that I advocate for, I see and hear and watch the energy and the timely personal intimacy that gets put into the advocacy work. So, I really do appreciate all of our legislators, our Indigenous senators, our Indigenous House of Representatives, because, they do take their time and effort away from their day jobs that pays their bills, their community volunteering, and their families to stand up toe to toe on an elevated frontline level with these oppressive anti-legislators. So I'm really excited that we have Representative Ruth Buffalo, and that we're continuing to use our organizations to move forward and elevate these conversations.
Thank you, Candi. And yes, to pass it over to our legislative warrior, Representative Ruth Buffalo, can you share more with us about, the work that you're doing in South Dakota and beyond to address this epidemic.
Sure. Thank you for having me. It's just kind of taking some notes here and thinking back to, I spent 7 years at United Tribes Technical College, where I was a head women's basketball coach for 3 years. And then after my son was born, I was the men's assistant basketball coach for 1 year. And then the following 2 years, I was the women's assistant basketball coach. But during those 7 years at United Tribes Technical College, I also led a wellness program where we focused on how can we improve the quality of life for our college community. United Tribes is unique in that they continue to have support systems for families and non-traditional students, and they have a daycare, childcare center, elementary school, K through 6th grade, I believe. So it's a really strong campus community there. And so when we think of human trafficking, or when we think of the violence against women in our communities, what comes to mind also is that, as a citizen of the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara Nation, MHA Nation is the first throughout Indian country to implement a human trafficking tribal code that actually is named after one of my friends. We're the same age. She was a social worker, got her education from KU, the late Lauren Whitehorn. We met as kids when we used to fancy shawl together. And so, there's efforts being made, but oftentimes being in crisis mode, I'm told that what happens at the local level or at Fort Berthold Indian Reservation is certain cases go directly to the federal level for prosecutory reasons. And so sometimes that Lawrence Law does get bypassed. And so I also want to mention 4 consecutive summers from 2011 through 2014, I led the MHA Nation's Taro Summer Youth Employment Program, Tribal Employment Rights Office, for people that aren't familiar with Taro. And we had a few, it grew out of popularity. At first was like a 6-week program, and then it went to a 10-week program. And I'm not sure how long I have to talk, so I'm just going to try to quickly brush over some key issues. But one thing that really raised awareness for myself leading the Summer Youth Employment Program for my tribal nation back home on the western side of the state, Fort Berthold Indian Reservation that I mentioned, I'm originally from Mandaree, is often referred to as the heart of the Bakken oil formation, Gilma. And so one summer, I believe it was the summer of 2013, one of our youth workers actually escaped an attempted abduction in broad daylight. Thankfully, she was able to escape. She was kind of the same build as myself. I'm about 6 feet tall. I'm a big Mandaree woman. They joke and say they call BMWs, but anyways, thankfully she was able to get away, and she escaped and ran into a nearby house. But what happened was she was walking to our Mandaree celebration, the powwow grounds, and this truck pulled up. 2 men jumped out and tried to pull her into the truck. And so from that point forward, of course it was reported to law enforcement, but, one of the previous speakers mentioned, what can we do within our reach? And I believe that every single one of us can do something within our reach. And so what we did was, we had already had a working relationship with North Dakota Safety Council. We were bringing them in to provide a live at 25 defensive driving course for our youth workers. And so over the weekend, I was able to get a hold of the trainer, and thankfully he responded, and we got another training. It was called Predator Stalker Safety Awareness Course, and it was basically a self-defense course. So we were able to offer that to our youth workers. But, so there's so many different things happening in so many different levels. And at that time, I was working for our youth and trying to find ways to keep them protected. And so I also had the opportunity while I was leading our summer youth employment program. I had the opportunity to attend different tribal business council meetings and just kind of sit in the room and listen and hear and see what was happening. At one meeting in particular, I remember the tribal business council meeting with different oil companies and telling them and asking them to respect our tribal codes. You know, I mentioned I'm a citizen of the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara Nation, and I grew up in Mandaree, which is called West Segment. I remember reaching out to my tribal council rep and different members of a men's society that historically protected our communities to see if we could hold or host community meetings and to figure out, you know, how can we get a handle on the population growth that was occurring within our exterior boundaries of our Indian reservation, Fort Berthold Indian Reservation. There was no preparation for the communities to prepare for that second oil boom, you know, the population growth. There was no public service announcements. That would have been nice to say, and that was in the previous administration, but it would have been nice, you know, for the communities to be prepared and to maybe even issue a curfew that would have, you know, told people don't be out past dark because there's outsiders coming in. We need to stay safe. We need to be protected, but nothing of that nature happened, unfortunately. We know historically and in present days, we do have a law enforcement shortage. I mean, among other things, among other infrastructure shortages, you know, Fort Berthold Indian Reservation is over 1 million acres. And I remember one particular summer where there was a suspicious truck parked on top of the hill by my mom's house. And we called the switchboard for law enforcement, and they told us there's no units in your community. They're all on the other side of the reservation for the powwow and partial or Lucky Mound area. And so we were basically left to fend for ourselves. And so, you know, I remember posting on Facebook, and thankfully our tribal reps, his late wife had mentioned, or she reached out and sent her sons over to help check on us, you know. And so since then, I know that within West Segment and the different communities within Fort Berthold, they have community security that patrol. And so that's just a little of my experience. You know, I live in Fargo, so technically I'm considered, you know, off-res, but my entire family still lives within Fort Berthold Indian Reservation. So fast forwarding to 2014, I was a graduate student at NDSU, and a lot of our community members mobilized. They joined in on a community awareness campaign. And I remember we were watching what was happening across the medicine line in Canada, you know, further downstream of the Red River. We're one of two rivers in North Dakota, the country that flows, it flows north instead of south. So downstream in Winnipeg, we were watching what was unfolding with the young First Nations lady, you know, Tina, who went missing. And we remember watching the news coverage and of them dragging the bottom of that lake area where the Red River ends. And so community members in the Fargo-Moorhead area mobilized and initiated a community awareness campaign called the Sing Our Rivers Red campaign. A lot of different key stakeholders, people who had conducted searches, people who were part of public health were a part of this. They did a call to action where we donated, you know, a one-sided earring to represent a relative or person who had gone missing or who was stolen from us. And so it became a traveling earring exhibit. To this day, it continues to travel across the country. And so fast forward to August of 2017, the late Savannah LaFontaine Graywind, she went missing. She was stolen from her family. She was 8 months along in her pregnancy. And many of us found ourselves on the front lines, so to speak, in helping search for her. We answered the family's call to look for her. You know, the search for Savannah mobilized our communities, tribal and non-tribal, rural and non-tribal. Busloads of people showed up from Turtle Mountain and Spirit Lake. Firefighters of Turtle Mountain showed up. We searched for 4 days for her, and on the third day, I remember reaching out to the family via social media to let them know which areas we were covering or had searched, and to see if they wanted us to search in any other specific areas. We were still hoping at that time that she was alive. We had hope, and so the outcome was horrific. And as a result, we, as community members, as moms, as big sisters, we took action. I used to sit on the Fargo Native American Commission, which is a 3-year term. You're appointed by the city of Fargo, so it's within the umbrella of the city of Fargo. We took action, and coincidentally, within the week of the body being found on that Sunday, August 27th, that following Thursday was our regular scheduled Native American Commission meeting. So I posed the question to the commission, what are we going to do? We need to do something, because prior to that, we were having community conversations saying we need to do something. We can't just, should this happen again, we don't want to waste time convincing law enforcement that our loved one deserves a quick, rapid response, because we saw the gaps within the current system as we saw what had unfolded prior to August 27th. And so we formed a local task force. It was originally housed under the Fargo Native American Commission, and then we ended up moving it to be its separate entity. And I believe the group now is moving more towards a nonprofit organization. I'm not as involved as I used to, although I did play an important role in founding it and getting it rolling. But again, I believe as leaders, it's good to get things going and then to delegate or hand it off to the next leader. So when we formed this local task force, it was really out of necessity to take action and to also send a message to predators. I think in everything we do, we want to send messages to predators that they're on notice and that our communities are mobilizing, and that we're not going to sit idly by and accept this behavior and these malicious attacks on our loved ones. And so from this task force, it was just a local task force, not just, but it was still very important. We took action. We met the last Wednesday of every month at the Plains Art Museum. And so I mentioned we didn't want to waste any time convincing law enforcement to take action should a loved one be stolen from us. We are human beings and we deserve a rapid response. The local task force works to amplify the voices of the victims' families and for the victims' families' voices to guide the work towards justice and to prevent further tragedies from occurring. So we continue to raise community awareness, mobilize the community to bring about meaningful change. And this local task force gave me a list of bills that they wanted to see implemented in the 2019 legislative session. So I took that list with me to Bismarck, and all of which was listed on that list, I believe six pieces of legislation, all passed successfully through the North Dakota House and the North Dakota Senate, and have become law as of August 1st of 2019. A lot of these focused on, one was specifically missing and murdered Indigenous people, law enforcement training. We included people for the specific reason of including all genders. And you can let me know if I'm talking over my time too. I'm okay with coming back and visiting on more of this later.
Yeah, it's up if you wanna take a break, but this is great. I'm really appreciating your remarks, and it's up to you. Do you wanna wrap that piece up and we can come back?
Sure. Yep. So I
Okay.
can just wrap that up. And then two other pieces were human trafficking prevention and awareness, focusing on schools and hotels. And then the other was data collection. Prior to this piece of legislation coming forward, North Dakota didn't collect any data on missing peoples, period. And so we were able to get the CJIS Criminal Justice Information System updated. It had a 75,000 fiscal note to it, and then to include tribal affiliation and to also provide access across the different jurisdictions, including a tribal representative. And so those are kind of some of the highlight areas. But now is the enforcement piece, making sure that these new laws are more than just looking good on paper. And so back to the gender piece, we use the language of people to include all genders. I don't think North Dakota realized just how progressive of a thing they did by passing it into law, but it was the right thing to do. Today, we face challenges in North Dakota where our trans youth are targeted, where the LGBTQ community is denied the protections they need and deserve. We introduced a bias crime bill last Monday, and it received a 12-2 do not pass recommendation in our House Judiciary Committee, and will go to the House floor this week for a vote. I believe our women need to be protected, and all genders, but also in the same breath, our aquifers need to be protected. So thank you for your time. Madzigirads.
Thank you, Ruth, for just so much helpful information and bringing us up all to speed on just both the historical, how all of this came to be, and also like what's going on right now in North Dakota regarding protecting both people and land. This panel is called Ending Violence Towards People and the Land. So we want to make sure that those are, both represented as we call for action and call for demands and as we heal. Ruth, you had mentioned, or you had brought up the area of Red Lake, I believe, near Winnipeg. And so I wanted to pass it over to Kakeka and hear more about the experience there up in that region, so-called Canada. And just can you tell us more about what you all are experiencing in that region? And we've been hearing different folks mention, these different forms of community organized protection. And can you tell us a bit about, like you had mentioned to me when we were preparing for this panel, the Bear Clan Patrol. So I would just love to hear what's happening in Winnipeg, so-called Canada, when it comes to this issue. What is your community dealing with right now? And then also what are some of the solutions that are emerging in your community?
Okay. So I've been living in Winnipeg. I grew up here as a little kid, and then I left for a bit and I came back. I've been here for about 8 years now. And I am a youth. So Winnipeg is like a really, I guess, just unique city. Trying to find some things. Like right now it's freezing. It's like -50. So that just adds to everything. We are the 7th biggest city in so-called Canada, but we have the highest urban rates of Indigenous people. The population is about 12%, but here in Winnipeg, that's really clustered into one part of the city. And we're also the fastest growing demographic. So having a bunch of Nichis in the city is pretty cool. Depending where you are, sometimes you can go a whole day without seeing a settler. So that's pretty awesome. You can even hear Ojibwe being spoken just over coffee at the mall. The whole city, you can just see the influence of the Indigenous population here, which is really nice to see. But however, here in Winnipeg, we do have, a lot of really serious issues. for example, in Canada, we are the murder capital. We have so many murders, in fact, that the media keeps tallies every single year, and every day there's a murder, they just up the tally. And we do have a lot of violent crimes, and everyone knows about it. If you come here, like they'll tell you not to take a cab. They'll tell you to be careful on the bus. So here in Winnipeg, we have a lot of systemic issues. We often say that, we are often overrepresented in these systems and underserved. We have the highest rates of child apprehension in all of Canada. About 90% of kids in care are Indigenous. And that just plays out because they don't really do anything. Most of the work we do here in Winnipeg, we do it for the children, the next generation. In all of our work, we always say, it is all of our job to take care of all of the children, all of the time. So bringing it back, you were talking about Tina Fontaine being found in the Red River in 2014. She would have been 21 this year. And when that happened, they tried to rule it off as, like a suicide, but clearly it wasn't. I don't want to get too graphic, but it wasn't. And, when it went to court, the media was really portraying her as, like it was like her fault that she was making bad decisions, that there was like substances found in her system. So the media really victim blamed her and dehumanized her and made everyone try to feel some type of way. And then as a few years went by, there was a report that came out about her final day. And I mentioned the system part because on her final 24 hours, she was in contact with 3 different systems here in Winnipeg. She was, contacted by the paramedics, the healthcare system. She was contacted by her social worker, the child welfare system, and the police also picked her up. And, she was trying to seek help, but she never received that help. These systems failed her. These systems that were put in place to protect Indigenous youth, to protect Indigenous women, to protect Indigenous people failed her. And they fail many of us regularly. I don't know if you guys are familiar too much with Winnipeg, but Aisha Hudson is a recent 16-year-old girl who was shot and killed by Winnipeg police. And they just went to trials and, they justified it. And they said that, the police were in the right to do that. So here in Winnipeg, the violence is always around us, and it's very real, very scary. So some things that we were doing here in Winnipeg is work in what we like to call the village. Because we don't trust these systems to help us. They never help us. They keep failing us over and over and over. The police don't keep us safe. Child welfare doesn't keep us safe. Healthcare systems don't even keep us safe. But we keep each other safe here in the village, in Winnipeg's urban center. So there's very many different groups like Bear Clan. Bear Clan Patrol has found so many people recently who were reported missing. They have found them. They went on the streets, found them, and brought these people home. Bear Clan Patrol is keeping us safe. Mama Bear Clan Patrol is doing the exact same thing. They're keeping us safe too by patrolling the streets. Here in Winnipeg, we used to do weekly anti-violence gatherings in the community where we just invited everyone to come out. And it was like a harm reduction space too. So, come if you're high, drunk, sober, whatever, just come gather with us in the community. And, we tried our best to provide access to ceremony and culture during these gatherings. We feed everyone and just talk every single week about what's going on in our community. You mentioned Drag the Red. There is a group here that's part of the village that does drag the bottom of the river to try to see if they can find any of our missing relatives in the bottom. Trying to think what else there is. There's just so much happening here in the Winnipeg on the ground at the grassroots level to try to keep each other safe. I mentioned earlier you can't take cabs. Cabs are believed here in Winnipeg to be contributing to the epidemic. There's tons of scary stories out there of people's experiences in cabs just trying to get home safe. So even here in Winnipeg, there's Equay Safe Rides, where you can take an alternative cab from a community member and just pay them to get you home safely. My work here in Winnipeg, though, is specific to child advocacy and trying to find youth housing. So I don't know, I just believe that that's really important and really crucial, I guess, in trying to find solutions is housing. Housing insecurity is huge. I believe in the 2018, I'm not too good at facts and reciting them. I might be wrong, but in the Winnipeg Streets Consensus, they found that 60% of our houseless relatives here are Indigenous, and a large number, I can't remember for some reason, I don't know, I have a newborn, a large number of them were former kids in care. And when they turned 18 or when they turned 21, when they aged out of the system, they had no house. So that's what my work here in Winnipeg is. I also work with Red Rising magazine, where we try to do as many in-community events and initiatives as we can. The pandemic has been kind of putting a strain on a lot of organizing, trying to navigate that. It was really strict here. We were in code red. You couldn't leave your house or anything. We were like, when you go to the supermarket, everything's like boarded off. That's what we had. So yeah, that's what we do with Red Rising is we try to amplify frontline voices and people with lived experience, and try to publish their pieces into a grassroots magazine and distribute it to whoever and wherever it is wanted. The last issue we just came out with was matriarchy, and that was a really cool issue. I suggest checking it out if you haven't. There's a lot of pieces in there about matriarchy, obviously. And I guess on the broader scale of living in so-called Canada is I've done solidarity work with tiny house warriors. I've actually gone down there several times. I spent a huge portion of my pregnancy there, actually. So tiny house warriors is a frontline resistance camp against the federally owned TMX pipeline, which was actually bought I think a week to 10 days after the National Inquiry for Missing Murdered Indigenous Women came out. And in that inquiry, it was stated that man camps are linked to increased numbers of missing murdered Indigenous women. And in that inquiry, it admitted it. And then a week later, Trudeau bought that pipeline. So I just think it's kind of funny to look at that hypocrisy. He just bought a pipeline right after he said that they were bad. Well, that the man camps are bad. So Tiny House Warriors is a bunch of tiny houses along the path of a pipeline, and currently they are along near where a proposed man camp was going to be built. So they set up those tiny houses to try to stop that man camp from being built, to stop those men from entering the community, to keep their women, their children, their relatives safe in their community. And it's been very successful, I think. Yeah, I guess that's all I really have to share for that question.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing and just making those, again, just, connecting the dots between how this issue is, intersects with, all of these systemic injustices, whether it's police, whether it's justice, whether it's so-called, the justice system, the healthcare system, et cetera, et cetera. So I really do appreciate that. And there's so many great little dot connections happening here, and I just kind of want to underscore those and uplift those. So all of you have mentioned, the failure of the police protecting our communities. And this is not a surprise. This is not new information to us, but I think it deserves to be, like I said, underscored, because right now we're in this moment, ever since this past summer, after the murder of George Floyd, where our communities, our BIPOC communities, are asking to defund the police. And I think that still that demand is taken out of context, and people think it's an attack on jobs, or attack on police people themselves. But really, it's a call to move funding to the healthcare system, to our education systems, to our child protective systems, social programs that will really support and protect our people. So I hear that coming up with all of your statements, all of your remarks, and I just want to make that connection clear. And then also, I think there's been a lot of question around, well, what do we do, without the police? Where do we go? And I think in our Indigenous communities are once again examples for how we can create community care and community organized protection. All of you have mentioned task forces rather, and I think that's something that we definitely need to see more visibility on and more amplification of, because we have been protecting each other. We have been stepping up to the plate to make sure that people are safe and they feel heard and seen, and that they're being cared for, and not just cared for, but these task forces are also committed to healing work, and that healing justice work. So I just want to lift those up as examples for all of the people who say, what do we do when we defund the police? Look to Indigenous communities, because we're doing that work. We have been doing that work. So I wanted to move into our last question for our time together this afternoon. And right now we're in this quote unquote new political era where healing has been centered. We hear the Biden administration, Biden-Harris administration, talk about healing our nation. And when it comes to the issue of MMIP, missing and murdered Indigenous people, what does healing look to you? And what does safety and protection of our relatives mean? And what are your demands from our allies, from elected leaders, from from the administration? Would love to hear from each of you on that one. Maybe Denae, do you want to go first?
Sure. Well, I've been sitting here in a lot of awe and appreciation for Kakeka. Is that how you pronounce your name? I'm so sorry. Is that right? Kakeka?
Kakeka.
Kakeka. Thank you. Yeah. When I think about this past year and the federal legislation that has gone through the Savannahs Act and the Not Invisible Act, there was a lot of pain and confusion when that bill was signed by a white supremacist and a rapist and somebody who actively harms Indigenous people by his very own existence in the systems that he upholds. That we're definitely living in an interesting time where we are forced to participate as Indigenous people with protocols on how to protect our people, but we're forced to participate in these systems that actively dehumanize us. And so my concern with the task forces, which are just my perception. I'm not an expert on the task forces and legislation and the laws and all these things, but I do know that um, it doesn't make sense to me. I would love something to make sense to me and for that to feel right and for that to feel good for us to participate in these systems. What does it mean for us to develop task forces? Like here in Salt Lake City, we're developing a task force for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, not inclusive of everyone because we're so binary here. And what does it mean to have this task force and all the funding go back into law enforcement and legislators who are non-Indigenous, who don't understand the crisis, who haven't taken time to understand the crisis, but are just going through the motions to satisfy us as people? That doesn't work. That's a waste of time for the tribal organizations really trying to do the advocacy work. We are critically underfunded. There's no, there's right now I could say that there's nothing being done to prevent this very final extreme act of violence that is very common in our communities. There's nothing being done right now other than Indigenous people protecting Indigenous people with sovereignty and that leadership and restoring our communities. I don't believe that our solution is within the Savannahs Act and within the Invisible Act and all the other um, task forces. That's just my critique. I know those things help. I know that there's an array of combating this violence. You can do it as an individual. You can have a relative who is unsheltered. When we talk about missing and murdered Indigenous people, one of the greatest pathways for them to be a victim of homicide or to be trafficked or to be raped or to die out in the cold, that's, homelessness is a leading cause of that. And we need to address those things. So people doing work with unsheltered relatives, they're doing missing and murdered work. People who are healing themselves so that they're not causing harm to their other relatives, that's missing and murdered work. And I think it's a waste of time in a lot of ways because we don't have time, right? We have people going missing every day. There are so many harms taking place every day. We don't have time. What we do have is like our resilience and our beauty as Indigenous people, the creativity in which we can come up with on protecting our own relatives. We are born with beautiful gifts as women and matriarchs and two spirits and queer people. And really, we understand what patriarchy, colonization, and all these things have done to our communities and even to our men and boys. We understand that harm has seeped into their identities, and in turn they cause us harm. And it's within all of us as women as well, and the queer violence that we experience. There's just so much, and I don't think I don't believe that the same system that dehumanizes us and has systems in place that are genocidal policies is going to be the one that saves us. I do believe in sovereignty, and which I'm so grateful for the Sovereign Bodies Institute and other like organizations who are doing Indigenous-led data research. And we know exactly what to do. We know exactly what to do as Indigenous people, and there are experts, there are beautiful people who are leading this kind of discussion. All we need to do is listen to them and implement exactly what their leadership. We know exactly what to do, and it's a matter of us paying attention to that. So that's I'm not sure if I answered those questions, but that's really what I've been thinking about this past year. And I'm so grateful for all of you. I know those of you who are in the political realm, it's a traumatizing place. You are warriors. I know you don't want to be there. I know your spirit doesn't want to be there, but you're there because you have to be, and because you have a set of skills that can help our people in tremendous amount of ways. I see Indian Collective doing an array of things. What Tiny House Warriors are doing, they're fucking badass. These are amazing, amazing matriarchs and women and people who are fighting pipelines and with real threats of physical violence. That's missing in murdered violence. Um, and, you know, it goes back to the police, like our incarcerated relatives and the criminal justice system. Those are our missing relatives. Those are relatives taken from our communities. And yeah, everyone, thanks for listening.
Thank you, Denae.
I can add to that a little bit if I can.
Yeah, of course.
One thing I want to note too is that like we need systemic transformational change across the board, and we need people to understand that, you know, everything is related. It's not just an isolated issue within our community. It's when we see violence against women and our people and simultaneously happening against violence against the earth, that is the same troubling, heartbreaking reality and relationship that we see, that we have to dismantle, that we have to eliminate. And we need to have that much broader, holistic understanding of the bigger picture. We need people that are non-Indigenous to see that this is a result of colonization, of white supremacy, and systemic oppression, and everything in between. And that this is a result of boarding schools, which was another tactic to eliminate the Indians, to kill the Indian, save the man. You know, this is stuff that is still happening today that we have clearly seen very visible, and especially in the last year. But I would say we need more representation within these task force and within these work groups, coming from our communities, coming from the families. And one thing that just this last week, I sat in on an MMIWG working group. That was really great. And that was really more centered, coming from the coalitions, coming from the people with the boots on the ground and the families, which the next day when I participated in Operation Lady Justice Task Force, very different, very very just stats driven and strategic planning of how we can make a difference from the federal side. But yet I still did not see representation coming from the families who know best of what is happening, what needs to be changed. And it's really disappointing to see that those voices, their voices to represent their loved ones, were not in that space. Yes, they gave credit and appreciation to National Indigenous Women's Resource Center, which I applaud them on their work to try and impact this change coming from an organizational standpoint, all of the work that they do to give back to our communities. But this task force needs the voices of the families, needs the voices of the siblings, needs the voices of the communities to better direct the direction of where this task force is going to go. So I'm always hopeful. I have to be hopeful because it's our next generation that I look to, and to those that I get to work with. You know, our youth that just ran 93 miles in prayer to raise awareness to shut down the Dakota Access Pipeline and to stop Line 3. It's them that continue to motivate me every single day. It's this little one that is sharing this virtual time with us in this space that we are fighting for. It's for all of our relatives. And so I just truly hope that just even through this platform, those that are listening in, if there are state representatives, if there are other lobbyists and other people that have connections and resources, like, please really listen to this conversation, and please, you know, elevate the work that is happening within this community and from the families and the advocates, because this is day in and day out. We live and breathe it. This is work that is just continuously happening 365 days of the year. There is no day off. And so I really appreciate you, Indian Collective, for creating the space to talk about this, for hopefully people to learn that it's not just an isolated incident. It is a series of events all coming together that has perpetuated this violence, this dangerous cycle every single day. So again, thank you so much for elevating our voices and for including us. And it's been a real honor to be in this space with all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jordan. Ruth, do you have some remarks?
Sure. It's an honor to share space with everybody. So I tried to write down the questions, so I apologize if I miss any of them. So the first one I think was, what does healing look like?
Yeah. So wanting to hear from you around what healing means to you. What does that look like in relationship to this issue of MMIP?
What healing looks like to me is making sure that we ourselves are focusing on our healing, our individual healing. My experience with the search for Savannah, that was my first time being a part of a search ever. We also had our local task force that didn't require legislation to be formed. It was just, community members coming together to create change. And so I say that also to our listeners, that you do not have to be an elected official to create change. This can happen at the community level, and it actually needs to happen at the community level. I believe the real change that we need and that is going to happen is going to come from the bottom up, not from the top down. And so what healing looks like to me is really making sure that we're taking good care of ourselves. And so I mentioned the search for Savannah. That was a really traumatic experience for me. And I didn't realize that I hadn't healed until I would happen to go to North Fargo, and I would just automatically be taken back to August, when she went missing. Because I live way in South Fargo, actually, where she's where the cemetery where she's at, and so is in close to where we live. And so healing, I would say, is very important in MMIP work. There's a lot of trauma. I still am doing work right now focusing on the prevention of human trafficking, and also sexual assault prevention and domestic violence prevention. But it takes an entire community. But what I've observed is that we need to really make sure that we're taking care of ourselves too. Because if we're not whole ourselves, I used to teach intro to wellness classes at a tribal college, and I got to shadow Dr. Linda Gorno from the MHA Nation, and she would say, she was the director of the wellness center at the time, but she would use an example of a ball, like say a basketball, sometimes it gets warped and there's a little bump on it. And so if we're whole, when you roll that basketball across the court, it goes to its destination. But if it's a little warped on there, like from leaving it outside here in the Northern Plains, you get a little bubble on it if it's too cold outside. So you roll it across, and it doesn't quite get to where it needs to go, but it'll get there. But so she used that analogy a lot of being whole, in terms of a ball, and how we need to strive to take care of ourselves and each other. So healing, I'm kind of rambling, but I think healing really to me looks like taking care of ourselves, starting with ourselves as individuals, and then looking at our families and our community. I did introduce a Truth, Healing, and Reconciliation Commission bill in this current legislative session. It was met with great resistance, even from agencies within the existing North Dakota state government structure, which was unfortunate. So it received a 12-2 do not pass recommendation. Some of the comments that were made in the committee hearing, or after they had opened it up without my knowledge in the afternoon, to an agency, to hear from an agency that they believe is already doing truth, healing, and reconciliation work. But many of us disagree with that. So Truth, Healing, and Reconciliation Commission would have been a temporary commission. But truly, it provided an opportunity for state government to really come together and to address, the historical traumas that have occurred within North Dakota. We oftentimes continue to spin our wheels because we don't fully address the past. And it's not to place blame on anybody, but to strengthen relationships in an ongoing manner, not just once a year at a summit. And so, this is a missed opportunity. But again, back to the change is going to come from the bottom up. Community members are already, excited over the idea that we're still going to go forward with a Truth, Healing, and Reconciliation Commission in North Dakota, but it's just not going to be underneath the state umbrella. And also that this will provide an opportunity for us to move forward on our terms. And so one of the comments that was made was, well, why don't we just move forward? Why are we taking, ripping off old scabs and when do we draw the line and things? And so really, healing does look like, to be heard, to actually be heard. And so accountability, I also wanted to address previous comments made. These systems weren't built for us, but we do have to hold them accountable. And by existing in these systems, we're striving to hold these systems accountable. Again, you don't have to be an elected official to create change. Again, I believe the real change will come from the bottom up, led by the community. In 2017, there were a lot of harmful bills being pumped out of the North Dakota state legislature. After posing the question online, would a cultural competency training for legislators be helpful? There was a lot of good response and support. So I reached out to someone who I considered smarter than me and bounced the idea off of them. They liked the idea. And then we reached out to a legislator and they said, send me a draft. So we sent them a bill draft. From there, they said they liked it and they'll take it from there. So we organized, mobilized our communities, and had a really good turnout at the committee hearing. This particular bill would have required North Dakota state legislators to take 4 hours of cultural competency training. And again, cultural competency is an outdated term. We're looking at cultural responsiveness, but at North Dakota, we knew we had to start at ground zero. And so this bill, received a do pass recommendation back then in 2017 out of committee, but it died by 6 votes on the Senate floor. And so again, these pieces of legislation are not the be all end all, but they're a step forward, an attempt to move us forward and to drive the narrative forward on our terms. So I just wanted to mention that, and also agree with the previous speaker that, within the Fargo-Moorhead area, our Native people are overrepresented in a lot of different areas, including the homelessness population. Our Native Indigenous people are prime targets for human and sex trafficking. And in fact, that is why we added, previously with our local task force, we added human trafficking onto the name of our local task force. Also wanting to uplift our tribal colleges who are doing and have been doing a lot of good work on data sovereignty. They are key stakeholders within our respective communities, and a lot of good work is happening there. So I believe our allies do need to show up and support. And I remember Judith LeBlanc saying at a convening one time that if we could save the earth right now on our own, it would have been done already. So we need our allies to show up with us as well. So thank you, Madzigirads in the Hiradza language.
Thank you so much, Ruth. Representative Buffalo. Candi, what does healing look like to you?
Okay, well, there's so many great concepts that we've been hearing about and elevating. I really love that they're at the surface and, through the efforts of Indian Collective, we get to put them in the hands of our allies. So definitely, and of our relatives who have no idea of some of the work that we do and, commit ourselves to. And for myself, I am the Indigenous Justice Organizer and lobbyist for the ACLU South Dakota, but we also cover South Dakota, North Dakota, and Wyoming. And in Wyoming, there is a state task force. And that's something that really caught my attention before I even started working with the ACLU South Dakota. So when I initially accepted this position, that was one of my objectives. I wanted to initiate a statewide task force for South Dakota. And, I put that in my work plan is to continue doing this work and also definitely elevating the platform that I am a water protector, a land defender, a pipeline fighter, and a two-spirit warrior. And I wanted to put all of that into the perspective of what that could look like, definitely fighting all of these obstacles that have been put in our way just by being Indigenous Oyate, being stewards of this land. And within that infrastructure, I know that we see what that work looks like around us, especially whenever we are talking about the components of healing and what that looks like. And, even just looking around in our community here in Rapid City, we're talking about unhoused relatives, and we have many Luzaha, the Rapid City Creek, and we do have folks who've been murdered and missing, our relatives. And that's why I really advocate for the term MMIR, because I do love MMIP, but it humanizes our relatives. When we say missing and murdered Indigenous relatives, that humanizes them, and it does spark and plant these seeds of these are human beings and they have loved ones, and there's loved ones who are hurting that are looking for them, and it's inclusive. So, part of that solution and that healing looked like the Camp Mini Luzaha, where we know that even just this August, there was 2 of our relatives who were sleeping along the creek who were murdered, and that was just, this past summer. And we continue to look at the aspects of grasping not just visibility and awareness, but healing. We have our circles, our sacred circles that have been broken. And for me, one of my platforms is definitely elevating the narrative and being inclusive and bringing in the two-spirit component. And, that patriarchy and misogyny with that colonial worldview, it eradicated what two-spirit people look like in our sacred circles. And it also eradicated Indigenous women healers. And that is part of the healing and what that looks like. And for myself, I know that my daughter, she has done some keynote speaking as a Indigenous youth. And I was so blown away by what she talked about. She brought to the surface how Sacagawea and how Pocahontas were her age. And she talked about how that was the first idealistic, colonial pathway for young Indigenous women and girls, and just the concept of taking and extracting from, the Indigenous lands and Indigenous peoples. And I do want to go back and highlight how when anything is extracted from Unchimaka, from our ultimate matriarchy, it does impact the Indigenous women of that local area. And because there's that whole concept of removing, and even within the KXL pipeline, it is not meant for South Dakotans. The narrative that Governor Noem is saying is about how the economy is being impacted and how South Dakotans are going to have higher gas rates. But again, it's being extracted and it's being shipped down to Texas so that it can be exported to China. But again, to go back to that KXL story, and that is part of the title of this awareness component, I was so blown away this past week when South Dakota Congressman Dusty Johnson held a press conference, and he brought all of these local business owners from Phillip. And, there is a horrendous man camp over there. And I definitely went over there with the Cheyenne River Grassroots Collective, who invited me to stand and be with them and to hold visibility. And when I witnessed what that looked like, I couldn't even convey what that feeling was, just to be near it and to see it and to watch it functioning. The stories that those business owners were saying made me so sick, because it was all about funds and money and losing the deficit and the loss of their future funds does not compare to the deficit and the loss of our missing and murdered Indigenous relatives. So just to continue talking about these pipelines, how they are connected to man camps, I am just so elated that our state level representatives, specifically Queer representative of District 27, has introduced the bill here in South Dakota for this legislative session. And the ACLU South Dakota, we will be doing a webinar, and that goes in part with our allies. I do want to have some non-Indigenous trafficking advocates speak.
Strong
I also want to have
Candi, I just want to pause you. There's just some background noise we're hearing. Okay,
I think
great.
what we really need to do is teach our
If folks
children,
can
especially,
mute their,
teach everybody
we're
that
hearing someone's background noise.
problem exists.
Is anyone else hearing it?
It's very important to teach
Okay,
boys and
great. Okay, sorry to interrupt, Candi.
Okay.
Continue.
Yeah, I was
Sorry
getting
about
passionate there. Yeah, exactly. I mean, just because I want to continue that narrative that we do need to elevate and involve and seek out our allies. And this panel that I want to put together that we're going to be hosting with the ACLU South Dakota to elevate this bill that's going to be coming forward. And it's more than just this bill. Like I was saying, it's planting seeds to initiate this statewide task force that I committed to when I first took this position. And I did agree that we, South Dakota, because KXL is here, both elevates the narrative and the deficit of what it looks like to have man camps here and what it looks like to, just hearing everything that Representative Ruth Buffalo was talking about and being at Standing Rock. I remember what that climate felt like as an Indigenous female identified person in a state that has a history of and active cases when we were in the middle of the Dakota Access Pipeline, when we were at Ocheti Shakoi. All of that in itself elevates this narrative, but we have to carry it forward. And we definitely have to honor those who led the way, but also put it in the hands of our youth. So I'm really grateful that we do have a youth person on this panel. And I know that organizing is so important, especially when it comes from the grassroots level. So thank you for, talking about the change does start from the bottom up. And I know just part of that healing in itself is reclaiming what it looks like for us to allow our women to lead the way, allow our Indigenous Two-Spirit queer folks to elevate their identities, because I just can't convey how seen and heard I feel seeing the title of MMIP or MMIR, to know that we are being advocated for, we are being fought for, and if I go missing, that someone is going to elevate the narrative that our Two-Spirit people also are part of our sacred circles, and that we're going to protect and honor and continue the elevation of healing our deficits and healing the hurt places and continuing to grow our Tioshbaes. So, Wopila Tonka. Thank you.
Thank you, Candi, bringing tears to my eyes. Kakeka, would love to hear from you what healing looks like in your community and your calls to action.
Okay, so I think that healing definitely goes two ways. In Anishinaabe we say "Meno Pemata win," which means the good life. And a lot of people always talk about what it means, and what I think it means is it's like reciprocal. So, there's your own personal healing that you do within yourself. Like for example, right now, I'm doing a lot of healing with my daughter. She's really sweet. I'm holding her right now, and there's so much love and care there, and I know I want to do the best for her. And then the other side of it is, I believe it's holistic, and it has to encompass all of your community. So even if you're doing good but your community isn't, there's no minnow kamata se win. Well, there is, but it just looks different. It's really hard for me to feel really good when there's a lot of stuff happening outside of my home. When I read, like media articles about violence that's happening in my community, he's being cute right now. Or when I hear, like you read the comment sections, it just really hurts. So for me, healing has to be more holistic. We can all heal individually, and that's really important and really valid, and that is a big part of the work. But it has to go hand in hand with healing the village and the circle. And I think that's what we're doing with a lot of this work. We do live in an urban setting, and a lot of times people always tell us, you have to go back to the land, you have to go to ceremony, you have to be on, like the territory to heal. But oftentimes what I find is that people forget that Winnipeg is still Indigenous land. This is still our ancestors' home. This is still, our territory, our ancestral inheritance. And I think, we've been bringing ceremonies here to the streets for many years now, and I think that's where a lot of healing can come from for the community. And then long term, I don't know. I just think that like a lot of healing can come from. What are you doing? Oh, she's sad. From land back and sovereignty, reclaiming and asserting our inherited rights. Our ancestors prayed for us to be here. They prayed so hard for us. So I believe that like if we insert and resist all these colonial systems that weren't made for us, there's a lot of healing in that. There's a healing in the land. Our languages come from the land. When we speak our languages, like we're speaking the land. So I think there needs to be a lot of work to reclaim culture, to reclaim language, and to defend and protect the land. And even if that is happening in the city, even if that is, like a street pipe ceremony, or if that's a sweat at, we have like, we do a lot of organizing in the hood. So sometimes we'll host sweats in the hood just for people in the hood. And I think there's a lot of healing there. And I don't know. I just think the healing is land back and reclaiming our autonomy over our lands, bodies, governments, and our families. And
Oops, I think there's some background noise. Okay, I think you're good.
Okay. And just getting rid of these systems, like abolishing the police, just cutting it out. And I guess some of my demands would be, to listen more, to come out more. I know here in Winnipeg, a lot of people in governance and in politics and who have a lot of influence and power, they always speak for us, but they never speak to us. They never show up. The work we do here on the grassroots level, we don't get paid for it. We volunteer. We do it like every single day because we're healing ourselves and our community when we're doing this work. And the people who are higher up, I don't even look at them as higher up, to be honest. I don't look at us as the bottom either. I see us just as the community, and that's always on top. It's in my heart. I think it's in everyone's heart. We're all in community, but that they just listen to us more, and that if they're going to speak for us, they better be speaking to us. They better be inviting us to the table. Not just one representative for the youth. A bunch of us. If they're going to speak about us, we have to be there. They have to know what's going on, and that when we invite them, they show up. And that's just my demands at the moment. Defund the police and give the land back.
support those demands 1,000%. Well, thank you so much. We've been here gathered in this virtual space for I don't even know how long. Time is irrelevant in this moment just because I feel so inspired by all of you and just inspired by all of your bravery and courage to do this work, and inspired by just all the love that you all have for your people and your communities. I just want to reflect back some of the things that I heard as far as, calls to action, defund the police, land back. I think when we're talking about land back, let's name current fights, extraction fights that are threatening our communities. We want to see the man camps removed away from where KXL was supposed to be built. We want all of that infrastructure removed. We want to see the shutdown of DAPL. We want to see the shutdown of Line 3 in Minnesota. And what else? We want to see more investment in our communities. I think all of you all mentioning, the grassroots work you're doing, to our allies, to those watching, invest in these organizations, invest in these people, because they're doing the work, they're protecting their community, they're out there being legislative warriors. So I also want to lift up that demand, that call to action to resource and support our folks, people on this panel in that way. And Jordan, I saw you raise your hand. You want to add to this?
Really quickly, coming up from March 7th to the 13th, Rising Hearts is collaborating with the Elizabeth Smart Foundation for a week of action. And one thing that I really appreciate about Elizabeth and her platform is that every time she has spoken at a panel or some sort of event, she mentioned that the most common question that gets asked is, what are you going to do to help elevate, the epidemic and missing and murdered Indigenous relatives? So it's really great that conversation is intersecting with her platform. And, she was kidnapped. Luckily, she was found, but she also recognizes the privilege that she had as being white, woman, girl, had lots of resources. People took action, and she recognizes that doesn't often happen, especially for Indigenous people and communities in the POC community. And so they're starting a new initiative to really help support Indigenous communities. They're already working with some tribal councils and coalitions. And Rising Hearts is really excited to be part of this collaboration. And so we're doing a week of action of fitness that's going to center around statistics. So 4 and 5, 4 would be 4 reps of something, 5 would be 5 reps of something, but to talk much holistically about this, the epidemic and the cycles of violence that's happening in our communities. While also Rising Hearts will be facilitating one-on-one conversations with a few organizations from the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center, from my dear friend Kola Thompson, who hosts safety planning and training with Indigenous Wellness Through Movement with Rising Hearts, to help us on the preventative side of what we can do to take action to better protect ourselves with the moment we leave out our door to go anywhere we need to go, and how do we make it safely back home every single day. And then we'll also be facilitating conversations with hopefully representatives from Sovereign Bodies Institute and Strong Hearts Native Helpline. But yeah, this is a whole week of action that we're really excited for, that people can tune in and participate in, while also focusing on your health and wellness too at the same time. And then Rising Hearts is also organizing in May, for May 5th, National Day of Awareness for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Relatives. We're going to be organizing another virtual run, a 5K, 10K half marathon, where the 5K benefits will go towards National Indigenous Women's Resource Center. The 10K registrants will go towards the Native Women's Society of the Great Plains. All amazing work focusing on supporting our communities. And then the half marathon will go towards Rising Hearts. But this is one way to put out informative content, especially people that are not from our communities, to learn more about this, how to take action, to beginning their proactive steps in showing up and supporting and talking about this. while also supporting community and the heart work at the same time. And that is going to coincide with their week of action of incredible panels that are about to happen. So we get to host the virtual run, and then I'll also be doing my 3rd year in a row of running in prayer from sunrise to sunset all day on May 5th specifically. But that's for future events, just for everyone to stay tuned, and you can find more about that on Rising Hearts on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. And we're really just excited to create these opportunities for people to be part of. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jordan. Yeah, we'll be sure to amplify that on in the chat on this live, and then also, of course, hope to support and amplify and maybe collaborate during that time, that other day of honoring and recognizing, creating more awareness around MMIP. Well, again,
can I just say one thing?
Sure.
Yes. One of the biggest and greatest ways that I think the general public and those who have who would love to distribute their wealth, those who are non-Indigenous, as a form of land back for Indigenous people, and really just the right thing to do, is distribute your wealth among these Indigenous communities and these organizations that are doing this work. Distribute it in a way that, like, here, it's yours. You know exactly what to do with it. There are no ties. I really think that's a beautiful way to honor the work that we're doing. We know exactly what to do. We know exactly how to protect our communities, and we know the pathways to healing. And it's really within investing in the work that we do that's really going to make a huge difference. So please continue to fund these organizations. It makes us more sovereign. It allows us to do work without these colonial repercussions and within these systems of bureaucracy. That's really, really important. And MMI Who is Missing will be providing a resource for everyone to, so I'll send it over to NDN Collective that we can get it out. So the 2008 to 2020 legislation, and at the federal level, tribal and state. So all the missing and murdered legislation that has gone through, maybe you can look it up and see if your state has anything, and you can be involved with that. Look up your local tribal organization, reach out to your tribes, see what you can do. There are many avenues in which you can help.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and one last demand or call to action I'll put out there. Right now, we're in across the country, just very waiting in anticipation for the confirmation of Representative Deb Haaland as Secretary of the Interior. And right now, there are many Republican senators who are trying to block that from happening. So we need people to be speaking out, saying, this is an elected leader who has fought tooth and nail for legislation around MMIP, MMIW, and so we just need to be vocal as fellow Indigenous peoples around what this nomination means, not just for our lands and resources, but for our Indian affairs, for our tribal nations, and also for racial justice and equity. We talked about that representation and having accountability in these spaces. So just wanted to put that out there. And yeah, again, I'm just so grateful to all of you for taking all this time from your Sunday afternoon. And yeah, again, just my prayer is that we can continue to alchemize our, this, like we've all kind of mentioned and acknowledged, this is heavy stuff. This is this issue. It brings up rage. It brings up frustration. It brings up heaviness and sadness. And I just hope that we can alchemize that and transform that into action for our people. And yeah, again, this is a dual holiday, and I just want to acknowledge like all the love in this virtual space. And yeah, I just so appreciate all of you, love you, and yeah, we'll be sure to continue to support and amplify all the amazing work that you all are doing. Ahiahet.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.
Support your Native legislators. Bullets in the front, arrows in the back. Lots of good odds.
Thank you, everyone.
Dilatanka,
Be
everyone.
well, everyone. Hagoanat.